I'd like to thank you for joining us for today's Blue Hornet webinar called Making the Switch, What to Consider When Evaluating a New Email Service Provider. My name is Susan Toll, and I'll be the host of today's event. Before we get started, I'd like to cover off on a little bit of webinar housekeeping with you. First of all, we are recording today's presentation. It's recording right now, and we'll be sending you access to that recording later this week. The second point I'd like to let you know is that while your phones will remain muted throughout the event, we have built in some time at the end for Q&A. So as questions come up for you at any point throughout the presentation, go ahead and use the Q&A feature in your WebEx user interface to shoot those over to us. If we don't get to all the questions during the live event, we'll make sure that we follow up with you directly afterwards, so no worries about that. Next, I'd like to introduce you to the co-presenters of today's webinar. It's my pleasure to welcome Skip O'Neill and Grant Johnson as our subject matter experts. Skip is Vice President of Channel Partners here at Blue Hornet, and Grant is Director of Customer Success at ClickMail Marketing. We've got contact info there for Grant and Skip, as well as their Twitter handles. And I'd like to let you know that we have an official hashtag for this event. It is #BHWeb, so we encourage you to go ahead and use that on Twitter. And Skip, will you take it away for us, please?
Perfect. Thank you very much, Susan, and thank everybody for joining this webinar and for being patient with us for the last 7 or 8 minutes. My name is Skip O'Neill, and as Susan said, I'm with Blue Hornet and I head a channel, and we'll be presenting with me is Grant Johnson from ClickMail. So here's just a quick rundown of what we're going to try and cover during this the next 20 minutes or so. And it's really kind of, should you switch ESPs, managing the RFP process, what to look for in that, and then also talk a little bit about some risks that could be out there and to help you mitigate some of those risks. And then what do you look for when you're starting a new partnership? And as Susan mentioned, we will jump into a live Q&A session here at the end. So, selecting a new ESP for any organization can be a really daunting task. Looking for a new ESP is a lot like looking for a spouse. I mean, you need stability. You need to make sure it's a really good fit, and that there's lots of room to grow together. And like I said, the next 25 minutes or so, we're going to share some of the tips to help make the switch. So one of the things you might be asking yourself or might be thinking, is it a good time to make the switch right now? What are some of the signs I should be looking for when considering making some sort of a switch? So one of the top things to look for is, has your list increased in size dramatically, and as your programs have not kept pace or stayed stagnant, or maybe the other way around, you haven't experienced any growth at all, and your list has grown stale, and maybe it needs an overhaul. Automation. Maybe you're ready for automation. This could be maybe where you want to start sending triggered email campaigns or sending out abandoned cart messages, and your ESP doesn't really have that kind of capability or functionality to allow you to do that. And then also part of automation comes integration and an API. Possibly your ESP today doesn't have a robust API to allow you to facilitate that. So Grant, anything else you want to add here?
Yeah, when we look at integration, one of the things to keep in mind is that email marketing best practices only get you so far. And in this day and age, data is everywhere. We have web analytics, we have CRM systems, we have social media, we have text messaging. There's many sources of customer insight, many possible customer touch points. And what we want to do is we want to see these all working in tandem for maximum results. So integrating with other marketing channels is really essential. And if your ESP is limited in its capabilities, that certainly might indicate it's time to shop for a new one. As far as strategy goes, again, in today's economy, we know marketing budgets have been cut. Staffs are small, and this is time to be really objective about your staff's capabilities. I mean, are you a one-person email shop, or are you 45 people sending email? I mean, there can be a huge difference in the amount of resources available to you. And it may be that what you need to really make your email marketing program successful is to get some strategic insight and have a partner that can provide you consulting services to help take your email program to the next level. And then lastly, it certainly might be time to switch if you're finding out that you have deliverability issues after they've affected your email performance, after you've seen a revenue decrease, because what you're seeing there is that you aren't getting proactive support from your ESP.
Cool, thanks, Grant. On the flip side of whether you should be switching is maybe there's some considerations to take under consideration as to not switch, or it might not be the right time to switch. So take a look back at your program in the last, say, a year or two, and were you committed to the success of the program? Not only your ESP, but also look at yourself. Look in the mirror a little bit, because success in an email initiative is a two-way relationship between you and your ESP. So the blame for a lack of success isn't always in the ESP's fault, but work together, work with your ESP. So some of the things maybe you might want to look back at is look at the functionality that maybe has been released over the last year or two since you've had a relationship, and maybe you haven't used that whole suite of functionality, and maybe you've allowed it to kind of go stagnant, and you got really busy, and everyone in your organization is being asked to do more and more and more for less. You don't have the bandwidth, and make time to listen to your ESP's account team, and you might be really surprised by how they can help you be successful with what you have. And then also, to touch a little bit on what Grant mentioned on the previous slide, is the dynamics of deliverability are always evolving, and if you're seeing declining metrics across your program or initiative, you might consider changing up your sending practices and actually take the advice of your account teams and recommendations.
Yeah, I mean, really what we think of here is if you aren't using your ESP to its full advantage, you don't know what you're missing, and that can be important. So I want to talk a little bit about the idea of an RFP versus a vendor shortlist. And here we start with, if you decide it's time to switch, how do you go about finding a new partner? Two most common routes are to send out an RFP to a large number of ESPs, which, frankly, over the course of many months will get whittled down to a short list, or you can forego the RFP process altogether and look at the short list sooner. In my opinion, RFPs are complicated and of questionable value. If we think about the 80-20 rule, you can virtually skip over 80% of the features and really pay attention to the 20% that matter, because, all the clients will have the ability to manage lists. I mean, all the email service providers will be able to send emails. What really matters is that you get to the items that are important to you, that you save time, because taking months to do an RFP can really be time-consuming. It's a lot of resources involved, and it might be that money would be better spent on getting an implementation or an integration or better training or something like that to actually use the features you have. So it's questionable whether investing in an RFP is really worth it. And the final point about an RFP is that RFPs can't really measure service, and service is typically the top reason marketers even switch ESPs in the first place. Anything you want to add there, Skip?
No, I think you covered it fine, Grant. Great.
Okay. Now, the vendor shortlist is kind of an inversion of the process. It's targeted, it's more efficient, and it allows you to focus on the key differentiators. And the key differentiators between email service providers should be synced up with actually the reason you started looking or considering switching in the first place is, what's your pain point? What do you think is broken? In a vendor shortlist situation where you actually kind of engage in an RFP process, but that is on a more limited scale, you'll have more direct involvement, more direct engagement with these various vendors. And this is going to be a good indicator of how well these vendors are going to live up to their service ethic in the long term. So if they partner well with you when you're going through this process with them, you'll get an idea of what they're going to be like, and you'll understand what their service is like. If you're trying to figure out how to, figure out who should be on your short list, one of the things to realize is if you go to, any ESP's website, they love to list their customers. So you can look at those customers and find customers that you think are similar to you. And if you find customers similar to you, then you're getting a sense of that this ESP is serving the market in which you fit. If you see that, all the organizations are Fortune 500 and you're a much smaller shop, this might not be the right ESP to consider. You want to look at, size, market share, customer base, people not in your industry or what your competitors might be using. All those things will help give you ideas as to what the ESPs are who would best work with you.
Cool. Thanks, Grant. Now that you've decided to do an RFP and you've whittled down your vendors that you want to put on your short list, what you really need to do is then figure out what to put in your RFP and discussing your requirements for the ESPs to answer. It's really important to consider the quality of information that you're asking for in the RFP. If you're very vague, you're going to get vague responses back. So some of the things to maximize your RFP experience would be, what are you currently doing now? Explain to them what you're doing today and what some of your objectives are so they can take that into consideration when they're formulating their answers for you. Do you have the right resources in-house to help maximize your email initiative? So consider that as well. If you're going to ask for help or services from the ESP, make sure you spell that out in the actual RFP process. Do you have metrics maybe to enable you to help your program succeed? So make sure you're measuring success and measuring what your goals are across both or multiple vendors that are going to be submitting their responses to you. And do you need to really consider, do you need to stop the bleeding, or are there specific pain points that you want to address in making a switch? But just keep in mind that the more specific you can be in what you're hoping to accomplish, the more detailed the RFP responses will be for you.
Yeah, exactly, Skip. The quality of the information you provide during the RFP process to potential vendors directly affects the quality you receive. And I want to make one note about this slide and actually the next few slides where we talk about optimizing the RFP process. Again, what I was discussing earlier about whether you should kind of do a full-fledged RFP or if you're going to kind of go to a vendor shortlist. If you go to a vendor shortlist, at that point in time, you're still doing, in essence, the RFP process. All of this applies. It's just, probably applying to 5 or 6 vendors versus, throwing it out there at, 30 or however many. So do understand that as we talk about the RFP process here, we're talking about the end result either way. So what do you need to know about your RFP participants? Well, this is, again, I talked about that 80-20 rule. Of course, everybody can send email, so this is the time to dig into the integration. An example of something like this might be if your email list has grown. We talked about that really early, and now you're finding yourself, instead of signing to 100,000 subscribers, you have 1 million subscribers. How long does it take your email service provider to send out 1 million emails? Can they send 1 million emails in the course of an hour, or is it going to take them a day to get them out? It's an important thing to ask because that really differentiates. If you're a retail provider and you want to be able to get today's hot offer today only out today, you need to be able to do it. So when you ask about their ability to send in volume, you also need to think about the speed with which you need that volume to go out. If you're asking them about support, you don't want to say, hey, do you have customer support, because everybody's going to say yes, and you don't necessarily need to find out if they have support 24/7. If you're in a situation where you're located on the East Coast or West Coast and you have a small staff and you pretty much know that they're only going to be working during business days, what you need from support is different. But if you're a global organization, you might need 24/7 worldwide support. You might need it in multiple languages. So this is where that detail in your RFP, where we're talking about asking the really right questions, it really matters to know. Otherwise, I'd say it's the sort of thing to skip unless it's relevant to you, because at this point in time, you're just trying to find, the vendors that are going to be able to deal with your pain points. So a lot of these questions are very basic, and you're going to get very basic answers, but try to drill in. Okay. So as far as drilling in, one of the ways to do this is to really do your thorough preparation up front. And so when I talk about thorough preparation, what I'm talking about is the difference between asking an RFP, do you integrate with Salesforce, to which virtually every ESP is going to be able to say yes, which is actually a really different question than asking someone if they're in the App Exchange at Salesforce, or getting to a level of detail like, is there any part of your integration with Salesforce that might require manual importing or exporting of data? And so this is why I'm talking about a 1 to 5 scale, because we might say integration to Salesforce is a 1, but if they're in AppExchange, wow, we're up to a 3, and so it really helps you categorize the data and qualitatively analyze the responses you're receiving from your clients. Then take this and make a scorecard so that you can easily compare all of these different vendors. And then don't include any requirements that you really don't think you're going to be using in the next 18 months. If there's feature functionality out there that's nice to have, chances are 2 years from now, just like you're looking at your email program having evolved and changed now, it's going to evolve and change enough more that it's hard to say what you might be doing in 18 months or 2 years. Other things you can do to make sure you're prepared, do your research, contact colleagues and industry associations and ask them about their experience with various ESPs. Look who your competitor is using, and look at what companies have email programs that you admire. Those are all ways to kind of dig in. It's important not to rush. Please give vendors a couple weeks to respond. It's an important decision. You really do want to give them the right time. Build in time for them to ask you questions. And if you receive questions from vendors, if parts of your RFP document they don't understand or they need clarification, we urge you to share these answers with all participants, because chances are it may be something that all of the organizations that are responding are having a difficult time with. One of the great things to do to expand your search is to ask the ESPs about competitors. Top competitors to ESPs, everybody knows who their competitors are, and they love to tell you how much they might win in a sales situation against a particular competitor based on features. Well, that gives you information on features to ask those competitors about to see how they all really compare with each other. And lastly, I'd urge you not to spend time on system demos until you've really narrowed your list. Frankly, it's really confusing to look at interface after interface after interface and remember who had what. So when you get it down to a handful, then it's really time to see if the user interface is an experience that you enjoy.
Yeah, hey Grant, that's a great call out there. When you do get it down to your final 2 or 3 ESPs during the process, one thing that you might want to consider is maybe waiting till midnight and calling their support desk, or wait till the weekend and call and just see what the response is and if people answer the phone. Other thing you could do is maybe go on Twitter and find out what their hashtag is and see what people are saying about them, whether it's positive or negative. It could really help streamline your process for you.
Great, thanks, Skip. So in asking the right questions, make them open-ended, not yes or no or multiple choice. Make the vendors dig in and give you thorough explanations. Make sure they're differentiating on the factors that initiated your desire to switch, because those are the things that are most important to you. And frankly, you should ask them for a migration plan. If they have they migrated any other customers from the platform you're currently on to the platform you're considering? How did it go? Could you even talk to those customers to get a reference? And then a great question to ask them is, what else should you be doing with your email program, especially if you put it on their platform? This is where that potential vendor can really give you a taste of the kind of thought leadership and service they will be providing, because they're going to tell you, if you come to their platform, here's some of the things you can do you aren't doing now, and that can be really critical information. So now I want to talk briefly about a couple ways you can get help in getting through the RFP process. One of them is, frankly, to look for a consultant. There are consultants out there that can help you do the analysis and do the evaluation, because they've seen dozens and dozens and dozens of ESPs, and they have opinions as to, how those different tools might meet your needs. In ClickMail, that's one of the things we do, and what we've actually developed here is something we call the ESPinator. and there's the URL for it. The ESPinator was our idea of making kind of an RFP in a box, if I can use that analogy. It takes about an hour to go through it, it takes about a half an hour to go through it, depending on the level of complexity you want to use. And what the ESPinator does is it basically asks you about your email program, the kind of questions you should be asking when you're working with potential vendors. It'll help you get an idea of the kinds of questions, and it'll help you get an idea of the kind of answers you should be expecting. I mentioned earlier about, kind of volume you send, the kind of staff you have dedicated, the kind of systems you might integrate. All through this, if you walk through the ESPinator, what's going to happen is we're going to give you at the end of it an output that is 3 ESPs that we think best fit what you've told us about your needs. And so this is a great place to start creating a vendor shortlist, is with the 3 we recommend, and then the ESPs that are probably top competitors to those ESPs. Now, earlier in this presentation, we mentioned that there's over 100 ESPs out there, and right now the ESPinator, we don't have all of them in here. We have, I think, 40 or more at this point in time. So it's a pretty thorough, great place to start, and we hope you use the tool.
Great, thanks, Grant. So now you think the hard part's over. It's really just starting. You've gone through the entire selection process. You've narrowed it down. You've submitted your RFPs. You've evaluated them. And now you've made your selection. You've picked your new vendor, your new partner out there. And with that, there's some change. And change comes with some risks. You might be saying to yourself, did I make the right choice in doing this? Was the functionality going to meet what the salesperson said we were going to do? So here are a few things to consider when making that choice and trying to mitigate the risk. So understanding the different levels of support and how to contact them. So make sure you understand the support model that they told you about and how you can engage with them. Grant, do you want to add something on that?
I'd rather talk a little bit about the next one, which is knowing your new IP address. It's important to realize in this day and age, we haven't really talked about all these different factors, but the whole idea of authentication and how authentication affects deliverability and reputation and how it affects deliverability. And when you switch ESPs, there is something you're giving up, and that thing is the reputation that you've had as a sender that you built on the IP address that you're leading. So it's important to realize that with a new provider probably comes a ramp-up time where you get a new IP address and you have to kind of slowly implement on this new IP address to make sure you don't create any deliverability problems for yourself. This is certainly one of the support features your new ESP partner should address with you when you consider switching, and it's something for which they should develop a plan for you. So as far as that kind of support, probably one of the most important areas to get that support is around that ramp-up of a new ESP. One of the things you can do related to this, too, is consider keeping your old ESP on for about 30 days as a backup so that you don't have a day that you end on ESP1 and begin on ESP2, but that you have a month of overlap so that you can make sure everything's going smoothly. Because if you have any problems, then you can rely on your old tool at least to get emails out for now.
Yeah, that's a great point there, Grant. And part of that whole process is going to be kind of managed by the account team that you're going to have at your new ESP. So make sure you know who they are, what the onboarding process is ahead of time, so you can have level expectations from the support and from the account team to ensure you have a very successful process. So, what happens here also is, don't forget your data. Your data is the lifeblood of your email campaign, and as Grant just mentioned, make sure there's a transition period where they overlap. Don't have the cutoff one day and start the new one the next day. So that data, make sure your data is moved, and you have a plan to move that data. And it's not really complicated. You just need to think about it prior to transitioning ESPs.
Yeah, one of the things related to that move your data to keep in mind is that you probably have signups out there on your website possibly affiliate websites, Facebook, whatever. Make sure that all of those places where people are coming into your email marketing campaign get updated so that they all feed into your new vendor.
Yeah, you're certainly right about that. So, you've made this switch. You're starting a brand new partnership. So make sure that the goal is to get everyone on your team and your vendor's team working together so you can achieve the results that you're looking to gain. Kind of make that the objective to make sure that you guys are all rowing together in the same direction. So some of the things to start and to stay strong is, like I mentioned earlier, picking the new ESP is like picking a spouse. Make sure you invest in the relationship. If you don't, you probably won't get the results you're wanting to get out of it. Stay current. Make sure that you're staying very up to date with new releases and enhancements. I know that's probably not forefront in your mind when you're making the switch, but down the road, make sure if this relationship is going to work, you're staying current with what their account management team is coaching you to do and the product functionality that are being released, and make sure you can see how you can improve your performance. And don't go at it alone. I mean, use strategic services, a team. Use a third-party consultant if you want to help map out short and long-term goals. Grant, you want to add anything here? I'm certain you have a lot of experiences.
Sure. Well, I think what you're saying about the strategic services is incredibly important, because one of the things, if you're going to all this work to change vendors, that whole, continuing to do what you've always done but engage, expecting different results kind of applies here. If you've never done something as simple as A/B test your subject lines or A/B test your from address, you're not going to see the sort of success you want to see if you're missing basic kind of block and tackling and things like that. So especially if you change platforms, make sure that you get your basics in order, that you don't send emails out on Thursday because you've always sent them out on Thursday. Figure out the best day to send on. Figure out the best time to send on, and let your new vendor help you with that, because it's really important that you do everything you can to get incremental lift. And that's something that I think is often overlooked. People get too busy and they say they don't have the time for it. And I think, how do you not have the time to have a better email program? So especially when some of it's really easy. So that's what I think.
Great. Thanks, Grant.
Thank you, Grant and Skip. We're going to move into Q&A here in a minute. And so I'd like to remind those of you who are joining us on the phone to go ahead and submit any questions that you might have. You can just use that Q&A box over there on the right-hand side of your WebEx user interface. And while you're doing so, I just want to let you know about Blue Hornet's Online Resource Center. You can visit that at bluehornet.com/resources. And there you'll find some additional information that you can use to guide your ESP switch. And one really cool thing that we're offering there on that Resource Center page is free access to a Forrester research report. That Forrester report's called How to Craft an Email Marketing RFP, if you haven't seen it before. It sells for about $500, so that's a great value. I encourage you to go ahead and you can just access that straight from the resource page. While it's available, it'll only be available for a little while there. And I'd also like to invite you to join us tonight on Twitter to continue this conversation, starting at 6 p.m. Pacific, so 8 p.m. Central, 9 at night for any East Coasters. We're going to be answering questions, and we're actually going to be taking a deeper dive on the email RFP creation process there. And if you want to join us for that, all you have to do is on Twitter, follow the hashtag email chat, and then when you're tweeting to be part of that conversation, if you just add the hashtag email chat onto your tweets, then it'll all show up as part of this Twitter chat online conversation. It's really a pretty fun thing to do. So now let's go ahead and get to your questions. Let's see. How long, Grant and Skip, I think you guys might tag team on this one. How long should an RFP process take?
Grant, do you want to go first?
Sure, yeah, I'll jump in on this one. Again, if you go back to the kind of two processes we talked about, the RFP, the full-blown RFP, or the vendor shortlist, we're looking at something that might take a couple months versus something that might take a couple weeks. what I would say is that you want them to be expeditious because you're attempting to deal with pain points in something that generates revenue. So I would say I've seen RFP processes that seem to drag out for 6 months or more. That's excruciating for everyone involved. So I would say, 2 months is kind of an outside limit for what I would hope an RFP process would take.
Yeah, that's. I was thinking along the same thing, but to kind of segue or to take it a step further is make sure that you set expectations properly. So if you say that the vendor replies are due back by February 15th and that the evaluations will begin on the 20th, be true to that. Don't let it slip, because then the vendors anyway that are making the submissions are always. They set their schedules around some of that, so just be honest with what you put in the RFP process for responses.
Okay, another question here. What is the best way for our company to communicate or contact a vendor to let them know that they will be included in an RFP? So from this, I'm gathering that the person asking the question is wanting to know how to sort of take that first step with a particular service provider.
Hey, I'll jump on that one, Grant. When you are thinking about changing vendors, make sure you reach out and establish a relationship with those vendors ahead of time. Being on the vendor side, the last thing you want to do is to have a blind RFP coming into the sales at company.com, because then there's no relationship there and there's not a lot of meaning to it. So if you do think about the vendors you want to submit an RFP to, reach out to them a few weeks in advance and let them know something's coming and you want to talk about it, not just sending an email with, hey, please answer this by a certain date in the future.
Yeah, if I can add a little bit of color to that too. One of the things that will help you do is actually make sure that you're sending your RFP to the right places, because that gives the vendor the opportunity to ask you a few questions. And it might be that if you're talking to a vendor that's typically kind of an enterprise solution, and you're not really, they may say, frankly, we're not a good fit and ask you to not include them, because they can already know in advance that it might not be a proper use of their time to really respond to someone who's sending out 10,000 emails when they're typically dealing with clients that do millions or something like that. So like Skip said, starting that relationship is really the key.
Thanks, Grant. Here's one that knowing the two of you, you guys could wax philosophical about for a couple of hours, but it's a good one. Somebody wants to know which is more important when evaluating an ESP, services or feature set?
Wow. It depends on where you... Go ahead, Grant. I'll let you tackle this one.
Well, it's kind of like asking somebody which is your favorite child. They're all important, and so what it really, to me, I'm not trying to dodge the question. It's really the combination, because they have to have the features that get their service to meet your needs. But what you need to find out is, does that require services to implement? So, for instance, if a company tells you, yes, we have relational data tables, but then they tell you, but we have to load them for you, and you have to provide us data in a particular format, that's very different than, yes, you can build relational data tables with this tool that we've empowered you to use. So I think you really have to look at the features that are most important, and do they require services to be utilized.
And Grant, I know that you mentioned earlier on in the presentation, or I've heard you mention it in the past, that service is the primary reason that a company will leave an email service provider. So I think you also have to kind of look at it in terms of level of service versus types of services that are offered. There's a little subtle distinction there perhaps as well. What do you think, Skip?
You are spot on, both of you, on that. It's you're not going to be successful going it alone. So make sure services, it can go just from the account management all the way up to strategy and delivering on the initiatives you're trying to accomplish. So those are great answers.
Okay, here's another good one. Is it okay/best practice to ask for pricing during the RFP process?
Oh, wow, that's a great question. I don't know who put it in there, but from a vendor's perspective, I would say ask for a pricing range. Obviously, there's multiple dynamics to pricing. Pricing can have to do with the service level that we just talked about, and also the email deployment charges. So there's a CPM associated, and as well as what that service level might be. So just asking for a CPM charge, I guess you could do that, but know that no vendor can give you an accurate answer on the service level unless they really talk to you about, what are your goals and objectives and how do you want to accomplish it and what are your resources available to help execute.
Okay, let's see. Somebody's wondering if it's acceptable to ask for a proof of concept during the RFP process. So I think that they might be talking about a trial account. Thoughts on that, guys?
It's acceptable to ask. It's not necessarily something you're going to see very often, and part of that is it depends on the complexity of the email marketing program that you currently have and how that matches up with the feature set in the tool that you might be moving to. Because if you're looking for proof of concept on automations or integrations or things like that, it's actually a really kind of huge investment to expect the vendor to kind of go in and build a trial account that does your sort of things, when what they very well may be able to do is say, well, we can show you our customers who are doing those things, and either let you talk to those customers as references or actually show you the literal activities on screen. So I think it's important to ask. I wouldn't necessarily have that in my world be a line in the sand. I don't know what you think, Skip, but that's what I think about it.
No, I think you're right on that, Grant. Reflecting back, I would say, a proof of concept might be once you've selected the vendor or the two vendors to have them do a bake-off, if it's not too complicated. But early on in the RFP, asking for a proof of concept, again, you can ask, but you're probably not going to get the results you're wanting there.
Yeah, good point. We have one more question. So if anybody's sitting on the phone and they've got a question that they want to get out, now's the time while Skip and Grant respond to this final one. And it's kind of interesting. It says, I got a response back to my RFP very quickly. My RFP was lengthy. Should I be concerned?
Well, it sounds like the vendor... I was going to say, it sounds like the vendor had a library of responses and didn't really take a lot of time to really understand what you were trying to get out of it, and they probably just pulled a lot of content and put it in a document and submitted it to you.
It sounds like they're maybe feeling a little sad that as much time as they put into their RFP, they don't feel like the vendor gave that time back.
Yeah.
Well, and actually, that's what I question is how much time did they put into their RFP? I mean, the response might actually reflect back to kind of the quality of the RFP they put together, frankly. I wouldn't necessarily be concerned. I guess I'd say, do kind of look at it like Skip said. Does it seem like it's all boilerplate questions? And if it does seem like it's all, boilerplate answers, and if it does seem like something that was just copied and pasted in, yeah, I'd be a little concerned, because then that's just going to show you kind of when you have other issues and questions, what you're going to get is kind of a copy and paste answer. So it's a little bit hard for me to say if I'd be concerned or not without seeing the actual response.
Oh, it's funny. I got a little follow-up question here while you guys were talking about this one. It might be a little tongue-in-cheek, but a person on the phone is wondering, is it helpful to put in an obscure question in an RFP to ensure that they read it? So trying to trick the vendor. I used to do that when I taught English. I used to put little tricks way down into the assignment to see if my students were getting there.
That's cute. So.
Yeah. Okay, so I think that's it. Skip and Grant, I'd like to thank you again. Tons of great information regarding the things that you need to consider when you're evaluating a new email service provider. And for those of you joining us, I'd like to share the contact information for Skip and Grant, our subject matter experts, with you here one more time, so all that information is there. And on behalf of the entire Blue Hornet team, I'd like to thank you all for joining us. Thanks again for your patience. And with that, we conclude today's event. Goodbye. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.